Hello, hello, hello. This is Priscilla with Scylla Travel, where I help you live the dream through travel. Why Americans love Paris and the international experience. My name is Priscilla with Scylla Travel. I help you live the dream through travel. And Scylla Travel is a boutique travel agency that offers premium travel planning and advisory services for active adults, women entrepreneurs, executive types, professionals, retired military, and I hope that's you. If you want to make a comment or you want to ask a question, what I would like for you to do is go ahead and click the link in the post granting StreamYard permission to show your profile. Otherwise, it'll just say Facebook user, and I won't know who it is that is posing the question. So, back to today's topic, which is why Americans love Paris so much and the international experience. All right, so I'm one of those Americans who, was just fascinated with Paris, right? Because, we're things that we see on TV, things that we hear when we're growing up, and the French just seem to be so cool and cultured and fashionable, right? So, what's the real meaning behind it? What's the real reason why Paris and France in general seem to be the place that people want to go? All right, so what is this fascination that Americans have with Paris? We have to go back a little bit, and today's is going to be a little more history focused. So this is travel, yeah, and I love traveling, but if you are a traveler, you actually have a bit of interest in the places that you want to visit. Those serious travelers, yes, of course, there are the types of travel where you want to just relax and chill out and just unwind, yes. But there comes a time in many people's lives where they want to do more. They want to experience more in their travels. And in order to do that, you want to read up a little bit about the places that you're going to visit. But because Paris and France seem to be one of those places that we as Americans always want to visit, there's a bit of intrigue. So why? So I'm just going to dig into it just a little bit. Now, the main three reasons, and I hadn't even thought about it until recently when I started doing the research for this live session. I said, you know what? I used to be really good in history when I was coming up in school. I was always interested in ancient civilizations, past civilizations, things like that. We learned all about American history when we were in school. I don't know about now. I went to school when I went to elementary schools, like in the 70s. I graduated in the early 80s from high school. I don't know what they're teaching the kids these days, but we definitely need to teach history. And when we teach history, we understand ourselves and we understand what went on in the past so that we don't make those same mistakes. We also, get a broader understanding of the world. And yes, let me see who's making comments. Who is here? Thank you, thank you. I can see you. Tammy, thank you for tuning in. I'm so glad to have you. This is Priscilla with Scylla Travel. So if you have any questions out there, remember, click the link that will grant StreamYard permission to display your profile if you have any questions or you have any comments. Okay, so what is this fascination that Americans have with Paris? So it starts with our history. And you know what? It didn't even dawn on me until recently. During the pandemic, I've been taking a lot of virtual tours, right? Until we could get out there and travel again. And it sort of ties back to history, right? And I've been taking some tours with a company called Context Travel, and they have like PhDs and doctors who actually are tour guides in destination. But during the pandemic, they came up with these context conversations where you could sign up. It's like $26 for 90 minutes, and the tour guide does these virtual tours, and I seem to gravitate towards the history one. So we're going to start with the fascination of Americans in Paris. It starts with the American Revolution. And then second, World War I, and then third, World War II. Those are the main things or the main events or relationships which really sort of sealed our fate and really tied and intertwined our history together. So I'm going to go on and just talk about each one briefly. All right, so the American Revolutionary War. We all know about that, or we should. The American Revolutionary War. What ended the American Revolutionary War was the Paris Treaty of 1783. Did you know that it was in Paris? Who knew that the Paris Treaty, or excuse me, the formal end of the revolution between the US and Britain, where we declared our independence, that became formalized in Paris? Who knew that? So let me know in the comments if you knew that. Hashtag I knew it. If you didn't, just say, no, I didn't know. So this is something that I I didn't even realize, to be honest. It's probably in the back of my mind from my schoolgirl days, but I hadn't even thought about it again. So, the Paris Treaty in 1783 ended the revolution and it recognized the United States as an independent nation. It also established the boundaries, expanding to the West Coast. So, we all know about the 13 original colonies. That was we were a colony of the British. Of course, there were many colonies of the continent, or continents, plural. Canada was mainly a British colony, and including the 13 colonies. We also had the Caribbean, which were British colonies. We also had the kingdoms of Spain, the kingdom of France, the kingdom of Portugal. But the Portuguese didn't really have much to do in this by that time. But we had kingdoms. We also had the Dutch Republic. So I didn't even realize that the Dutch had their own republic since the 1500s. Go figure. So those were the main European powers at the time that had colonies, and there was a competition between them all trying to establish dominance on the globe. So there was a 7-year war before, and this was where these powers were fighting amongst each other, mainly England and the French. The French got the short end of the stick and were angry at the British. So guess what? The French assisted the Americans in their revolution. They provided supplies, even though they had colonies, a colony basically, Louisiana, and some of the other Midwestern states. They didn't really have much control because the natives had control of the area. But the Spanish, they had like California, Mexico, and South America. They had a huge swath there. And during this treaty, it established the boundaries between these nations, actually. So they all agreed on what the boundaries were going to be. But the first thing and the most thing, because the Americans, we actually came out on top. Now, I got to have a sidebar there because every American didn't get the come out on top, because we did have the Native Americans. They were not included in the talks, and they wanted to. There were some tribes that were friendly to Americans, but they got left out. So here we go. The U.S., the United States, and you know who they are? Benjamin Franklin was there. John Jay was there. Henry Lawrence and John Adams. So John Adams was a president. Was he the third president? I can't ever remember, but he was one of our presidents. He became president later on. John Jay, there's a college in Brooklyn, in New York City, named after him. My sister went there because I'm originally from Brooklyn. Benjamin Franklin, we all know who he was, but how many people realize that he was actually a diplomat? So he was instrumental in negotiating this treaty during that time. So here is that it was signed at a hotel. The hotel is not there anymore. So there's a plaque there. That's an old picture of a hotel. Afterwards, the Granger, uh, the original hotel is not there anymore. Okay, so it was the Hotel de York. So that's where it was. So there's a plaque right there on the building that recognizes this. It's called the Hotel de York. It's at 56 Rue Jacob. So Rue means street. Where the Treaty for Independence of the United States was signed in 1783, right? Okay, so that's where it actually was signed, establishing the United States as its own republic. So, there were four treaties, like I said, the treaty with the United States becoming a sovereign nation, the treaty with France, the French kingdom, mind you, the treaty with Spain, the Spanish kingdom, and the treaty with the Dutch Republic. So that's where the boundaries were established, or the beginnings of the establishment back then. So why, shall we say, um, Paris actually was a cultural capital of the world because of that, right? During the late 18th century, people started to go to Paris. This is after um, the treaty. So people started going there because in the United States, we were a young nation. We didn't have universities. We didn't have like um, we didn't have the cultured society like they did in France. Paris was considered the cultural capital of the world until after World War II. So, doctors, scientists, art students, journalists, and business people, they went there because of opportunity. And also, they felt as though they would have freedom to have pleasure, just to be free to live the pleasurable, um, good life, because the French were considered to be a little decadent. So they felt as though they could go there and they could go to university, they could study to become doctors and scientists. That was where people went to get training, and then they came back. But then after that, see, during those times, the average person couldn't go. But as time went on, travel to Paris and France became more accessible. Okay, so those are the reasons. Now, here goes some of the American writers that actually went there: Ernest Hemingway, James Baldwin, Gertrude Stein, and Richard Wright. They are famous American writers who went to Paris to establish themselves. They went there to get recognition. That's where you went to become recognized as an artist or as a writer or journalist in society. That is where you got your sort of coming of age in Paris. So these are just some of the American writers who went there. Other artists from other parts of Europe also went to Paris as well. But here I'm just focusing on the Americans. All right, so Montmartre, that is a neighborhood where many of these people lived. This is a picture of Montmartre, and that is the Sacré-Cœur. That is the Church of the Sacred Heart. I was there last year. It's stunning. People still worship there. That neighborhood where this church was built, this cathedral was built, is where many of these writers and artists lived. Okay, Montmartre, and that is the Sacré-Cœur. So it's a beautiful, beautiful church in that neighborhood. So that neighborhood of Montmartre was in addition to the Latin Quarter, but Montmartre was one of the famous neighborhoods where these struggling artists and struggling writers lived. It's expensive to live there now, but then it wasn't so much because it was on the outside of Paris. It's on a hill. You can oversee the entire city of Paris. We went up there on a tour for the City of Lights tour. You can look down. We took a little trolley up to the top of the hill. You can look down and see Paris, the City of Lights, because it's lit up. It's a beautiful city. Napoleon Bonaparte, he had it rebuilt because it used to be not so nice before, but he had it rebuilt, which is why it's the beautiful place that it is today. All right, so now we move on to World War One and the Treaty of Versailles. Now, this is another reason, another point in time where we and the French were tied together because of fate. And it's a war, of course. So the Treaty of Versailles was signed June 28th in 1919 in France, yet again. France again. Now, and I don't remember much about World War One because we always focus mostly on World War Two in school. I do remember the shot fired around that was heard around the world, where a ruler, an Austrian ruler, was assassinated, and it kicked off wars, and then it spread. Germany invaded Belgium and France, and that since we were the part of the Allies, we came to Germany's aid. So the Allied forces were. Let's see, I know I wrote that down. The Allied forces were the United States, France, um, England, Russia, Japan. Let's see, who else? I can't remember. Wait a minute. France, Italy, Japan, Russia, and the United Kingdom. They were the Allied powers. The other powers were the Central Powers. So, but Germany invaded Belgium and France, so they actually occupied it. So the United States was at war, or the Allied powers were at war with Germany. And President Woodrow Wilson was president during that time. He actually was one of the main people who negotiated this treaty. And at that time, he declared that the United States was the savior of the world. And that's when the United States moved to the front stage of the world stage, and he declared that we were the saviors, and there was never going to be another war. Of course, we know that didn't happen because World War II came. Right? But that's when it all started. So that's another time that the United States and France, our fates were tied together. Okay. Now, this right here is the Palace of Versailles, where the treaty was signed. It's a gorgeous building. So some of these buildings and these places of historical significance, and I thought I would talk about it from a United States perspective or a U.S. perspective because our fates are tied together, and many times people don't realize why we want to go to these places or why we do or we travel to these places. It's because of history, because we forget. So that's why it's important to remember your history. So at the Palace of Versailles is where the treaty was signed. Okay, now after World War I came the introduction of jazz. So after World War I, some Black American entertainers started traveling to Paris to escape extreme racism. So by them going there, they exposed the French to jazz. And at that point, the French fell in love with Black art and culture. So one such notable jazz pioneer, his name was Sidney Bechet. He was an American jazz saxophonist, clarinetist, and composer. He and Josephine Baker went. There were a number of Black American artists who went to France in 1925, I believe. They sailed there to perform. And Josephine Baker, she is an expat, meaning that she became a citizen of France. Okay, so she never did come back, unless she did come back to visit, but she never did come back. She was very grateful that the French they embraced her and her craft, and she actually was a spy during the French Revolution. She was also the first American woman to be buried with full French military honors. Notice I said the first American woman to be buried with full French military honors. So that was Josephine Baker. That happened in 1975. Now, last year in November of 2021, Emmanuel Macron announced that she would be interred in the French Pantheon. That is the Hall of Heroes. That's where they are buried in France. So, of course, she was friends with the Queen of Monaco, and she died in Monaco, and she's buried there. Her family didn't want to dig up her bones and move her there, so they move her to the Pantheon, but they symbolically interred her at the French Pantheon as a hero because she was actually a spy. They thought that they didn't think anything of her because she was a singer and she traveled. Um, During that time, the Germans invaded France, right? Let's see. The Germans invaded France, and many of the African Americans who were part of the jazz scene, they left because the Germans at that time during World War II declared jazz as some type of sin, and they were threatened with going to prison if they continued. So many of them went to some of the French colonies in Africa, like Senegal. So many of them went there. Some went back home, but a lot went to Senegal. But Josephine, she stayed and she continued to perform um, at these clubs. And the German soldiers used to come and they would be talking about their plans. And they didn't think anything of her. And she was steady, taking notes and listening and taking intelligence to the French Revolution. So she was a hero. All right, to the French. That's a picture of Josephine Baker. And this is where they have a picture of her in front of the Pantheon last year where they interred her symbolically because she was a hero to the French. All right, now, like I said, Paris was occupied in 1940 by Germany. And then here we go to D-Day, right? That is the invasion of the Allied forces during World War II. They invaded Normandy off the coast of France on June 6, 1944. There is a movie out there that John Wayne made many years ago. What was it called? The Longest Day. There was a movie with, why am I drawing a blank, called Saving Private Ryan, Tom Hanks. I think that was him. Saving Private Ryan. No, not Saving. Well, there was a movie with one of those actors, and they were showing the movie was set during that period of time, D-Day. And the Allied forces, it was the United States and Canada and UK stormed the beaches of Normandy, liberating the French from the Germans. That was at the end of the war. And so we all know the Eiffel Tower. That's a picture that I took at night during the light show. During World War II, the Eiffel Tower was used as a radio tower. And it was initially bought for one of the world fairs, and they were supposed to take it down, but they didn't. Someone proposed that they use it as a radio tower, and it was used that way. And it's still here today. Okay, so the Normandy beaches. That's where the Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy under heavy fire. They took heavy losses, but they were able to press through and liberate France. So that's another reason why the French and Americans are so friendly, especially in northern France, close to Normandy. There were also some beaches on Provence, France, which is more southerly, the southern part, on the opposite side of Provence, and some beaches there as well where Americans and Canadians landed. But the Normandy beaches are the most popular. And there are some other things that you can do in Normandy. The Normans are very friendly to Americans, so that's a wonderful tour to take. Especially river cruising. It's a wonderful, wonderful way to travel from Paris to Normandy. You stop in some of the villages on the way, stop at castles, Richard the Lionheart's castle, as well as there are food tours because the French in that area, well, the Norman community, that group of people, they are famous for apple cider. Not just any old apple cider, they actually make a wine out of it, and they have all types of cider. They are also known for seafood. So seafood is part of that cuisine, cheese and sausages in Normandy. So now, why does it seem that everyone wants to go there now? Because a lot of people have forgotten all about all that stuff, right? A lot of people have forgotten all about all that stuff that happened, and I had to look it up again. So why? Well, number one is people seem to be intrigued to this day about the French, and especially Parisians, right? There's an romanticization of French women. It's perceived to be a place of status. If you go there, then you have this status, you have this aura of status of going there, and it's supposed to be a place of high fashion. So, however, when I went there last year, it was nothing like I imagined. France, period, was nothing like I imagined at all. It was nothing like these ideas that we got from movies of how France was going to be like, what France would be like. I started out at the southern part of France, took a river cruise from Avignon. Well, I flew into Marseille, which is in the Mediterranean coast. Took a ship, boarded the ship in Avignon, where the papal palaces. Did you know that there was actually a pope that lived in France at one time? There was more than one pope. And sailed from there to Lyon, which is the gastronomy capital of the world, so the French say, but it's the gastronomy capital of France. And then from there, I took the high-speed rail to Paris, where I spent 3 nights in Paris. So personally, I like the countryside better. That's just me. I prefer the country. But when I got to Paris, I was looking for, where is all the French fashion that I thought I would see on the runways because of Vogue magazine and all of the things that I see on TV, and I did not see that. What I saw were regular people. People who dress like this. That looks like Brooklyn fashion. So I did a little research, and actually, Parisians come to New York and they like Brooklyn. This is how we dressed when I was in middle school. Okay, we wore even dresses with sneakers, which is what I found. But then again, the French walk everywhere. They walk. There are bike trails everywhere. There are where people ride scooters. There are even cabs where you can catch a person on their scooter and they will transport you for a fee. So that's what it looks like. And this is also a feature of Paris, right? We see a lot of, which I was surprised, I saw a lot of people who wore hijabs, and it was, nothing strange about it. I didn't expect that. I just did not have that in mind when I thought I was going to visit France or Paris. But hey, it was nice. I wish I would have known. I would have dressed more conservatively. So they actually are quite conservative in France. They dress conservatively. So this is the type of fashion that I saw. These are the people, everyday people that I saw in France and in Paris. People just going about their everyday lives, just living their lives and living the dream. So why do Americans love Paris and the international experience? So number one, I'm going to rehash. I'm just going to just go back over. Number one, they like because of history, right? The French were instrumental in securing the treaty, uh, the Paris the Peace of Paris was what the event was called, but it was the Paris Treaty of 1783, which established the United States as a sovereign country. Okay, so Number two, World War One, where the Allied powers went to war with Germany and helped dispel the Germans from France. France suffered greatly um, during World War One, and then World War Two. When they were occupied, the U.S. troops, along with the Canadians and the British, stormed the Normandy beaches and liberated France. So those are three of the main reasons which sort of forged our relationship. And sometimes it's a love-hate relationship. Sometimes we think that the French are a little snooty, but the French are actually very reserved. Paris more so than the southern part. And when you travel through the country, it's these little villages with different groups of people. They're not all the same, totally different than living in France. It's a very diverse place. Paris is really diverse. Even the southern part of France is diverse. Um, People walk everywhere. They're pretty friendly. They're not loud. We Americans tend to be loud. They're just not loud. Um, we come from a tip culture. In France, you just get paid what you get paid. They don't rely on tips, so you don't have servers or wait staff clamoring to please you. You may find that they may take a little longer. That's just how they are, a little bit more relaxed and reserved. We come from a grind culture. They really put family and trying to be stress-free or living a stress-free life at the front, and a healthy life, like with all of the walking. And certain days in Paris, you can't drive your cars downtown. You can only take the train. So they have high-speed rail throughout the country. You can go anywhere in Europe just about because of high-speed rail. Their health, you don't have to worry about paying bills when you get sick. They have health care plans that you pay that's really low. They pay the doctors there, pay just the same amount of money that our doctors here do. It's just that they don't pay as much for their medications. And they get a lot of sick leave. You get paid when you get sick. You have vacation at a minimum 4 weeks of vacation a year. And when a woman has a baby, she gets up to, I believe, a year off and pay for the first child. Now, the second child, I think it's like 80%, but still. It's encouraged to go and spend time with your children, which I was surprised because I was there during the week and I'm visiting some of these like national parks. A lot of these places that we visit are national parks, and I'm wondering, these people are here with their kids in the middle of the week because they get time to take off to do such things. So it's a little bit different, a little bit less stressful. So that difference in culture might make it seem one way or another. We're used to moving fast all the time, and they're just not. So that was all I had for today. So join me next Sunday at 6 p.m. where I'll be talking about travel, culture, and the Black experience. And I'm going to be starting in Paris, as a matter of fact. So this is Priscilla with Priscilla Travel. Hoping that you have a great rest of your day, evening, or morning whenever you look at this video. And let me just make sure if there are any more comments. Anyone here, thank you. Thank you for joining. I appreciate it. If you've got any comments or questions, go ahead and make them. I will get back with you. Remember, as always, remember guys, as always, live the dream.